Today I will be answering the question, what do Liberals fear? Please note that I am Australian, as you can probably tell from my accent, but I'm using Liberal in the American sense. That is basically to mean left-wing people, or people who are left of centre. Consider the film 12 Angry Men. In this film, you have a jury who are fairly convinced that the accused is guilty, but one juror says, well, I'm not completely convinced that they're guilty, let's just talk about it and look at the evidence until we make a decision. They talk about it, and he convinces another juror. They keep talking about it, they convince another, and they find him innocent. You're meant to understand that that's the correct decision. And this is how I think Liberals would like the world to be. There is injustice, there is stupidity, there are people who jump to conclusions, there are people who are bigoted. But if we talk about it, if we examine the evidence, we can convince those people, we can get them to see the truth. But what if it wasn't like that? What if what happened instead was the juror with doubt said, well, this bit of evidence doesn't seem to quite add up, and then the other juror said, well, yeah, it doesn't, but I still think he's guilty. I think that would be the thing that Liberals fear the most, that I would put in two words as irrationality triumphant. A world where you can discuss the evidence, you can put your argument, you can have a good case, and then in the end people go, yeah, but I'm going to do the other thing anyway. And I think that is why Brexit and Donald Trump in particular are so engaging and so enraging to Liberals. I personally am very interested in Brexit. I follow the news about Brexit probably more than I follow the news about politics in my own country, actually. And I think the reason that I'm so compelled by it is that it seems to be an example of irrationality triumphant. They had a debate about it. People said, well, if we leave, we won't be able to trade with... for those who don't know, Brexit is the United Kingdom's leaving the European Union, which they voted to do in 2016 and ended up actually doing a few years later. They had a debate about it. Every economist, apart from, there might have been one or two who said otherwise, but pretty much every economist, whether they were sort of associated with the left or the right of politics, said if we do this, we'll lose a substantial amount of trade because we won't be able to trade freely with other countries in Europe anymore. And people went, no, yeah, well, it'll be fine. The promises made by the Brexit campaign were wrong, and people said they were wrong at the time. And people went, oh, yeah, no, they're fine. It's fine. And Brexit still happened. It was quite narrow. I believe it was 52% to 48%, but it still, it still happened. And there are millions of people who will insist that it was a good idea, despite the fact that more or less everything that the Leavers promised, Leavers being people who are in favour of Brexit, more or less everything the Leavers promised hasn't happened, and more or less what has happened is what the Remainers, which are people who were against Brexit, said would happen. You win the argument, but somehow winning the argument doesn't matter. And then it turns out you were right, but it turns out that being right doesn't matter. And the people who you beat in the argument still think they're right somehow. That, I think, is the thing that Liberals fear, irrationality triumphant. And I think it's also the reason why Donald Trump is so compelling. People said, he's a crook. He's a bit of a crook. He's dishonest. He's making these promises. He says he's going to lock up Hillary Clinton. What's he going to lock up Hillary Clinton for? He says he's going to build this wall. Well, I mean, we looked into how much that's going to cost, and it seems like it's going to cost billions of dollars. The wall didn't get built. Hillary Clinton didn't get locked up. Turns out he was a crook. Turns out he was more of a crook than anyone thought. He was connected to Russia, which I don't think anyone thought during the presidential campaign. That came out during his presidency. And yet there are millions of people who are still longing for Trump to come back in 2024 and talking about what a disaster it is that Trump isn't in power anymore. And that is an example, I think, of what liberals fear.